I'm Rebecca Poirier. This is our presentation on Buddhism and Death and Rebirth. In our group is Carson Bratt, Cassandra Campion, Bailey Parent, and of course Rebecca Poirier and myself. This is our IDST 485 presentation.
Hi, my name is Cassandra Campion, and I will be introducing you to Buddhism. Buddhism, Death and Dying Practices. Buddhism was created 2,500 years ago by Siddhartha Gautama, who was an Indian prince. Although Gautama was his family name, he would be later known as Buddha or the Awakened One. Buddhism is a widespread religion in many countries such as Burma, Bhutan, Nepal, Sikkim, Sri Lanka, Thailand, China, Japan, Tibet, India, Africa, and the West. Buddhism differs from other religions because it acknowledges no God and can be viewed more of a lifestyle or philosophy than a religion. Since Buddhism is viewed more as a lifestyle than a religion, it can be easily adopted because of the calm, individualistic way of living and can be expressed in one's own way. This presentation will explore the Buddhist belief system, rituals, body preparation and disposal of the deceased, the grieving process, and implications for health professionals.
Hi everyone, so my name is Bailey Parent and I'll be presenting today Buddhist beliefs. So this is going to look at the overview of the Buddhist culture as well as their views on death. So to begin, something important to realize and recognize is that Buddhists view their faith as an individual experience over solely having the knowledge of the belief. So instead, you're going to be practicing what you preach is essentially what it will be. So to understand those practices, you have to understand the various terms actually associated with each in order to have that full understanding. So some terms that I want us to make note of are things like karma. This means to hold in the eyes of a practicing Buddhist. So they believe closely and live closely with this term because it's believed this is the fundamental structure holding their universe together. So you abide by the practice and you live free from suffering is essentially what's going down. Then we look at dana, which means to give, and Buddhists actually don't believe in giving to the poor. So when you're somebody who's living in poverty, you're supposed to make your way through that poverty situation. So it's their way of making you experience and making you, so to speak, having your own fate through that rebirth process. Next, we look at satipatthana, which means to establish mindfulness. And you have 4 stages to go through. So that's your birth, your abiding, destruction, and nothingness. So Buddhists actually believe that your world is continuous. So there is no beginning, there is no end, there's just these 4 stages. Next is karma. Karma, it's one we're all familiar with. So that's your good and your positive actions lead to good and positive results. Your evil or negative actions lead to negative results, correct? So you can't experience karma without rebirth and vice versa. Regardless, if you're good or bad, it will carry forward into your next life, and this will then hinder your ability to reach enlightenment. And then our last term we're going to look at is one called nirvana. And this is your ultimate, this is your sweet spot in Buddhism. So your goal is to extinguish having sorrow, attachment, grieving, and instead you're going to achieve a state of supreme happiness. Once you reach nirvana, you've reached the ultimate enlightenment. And then we're going to look at the importance of suffering. So a Buddhist actually believes suffering allows them knowledge surrounding their experience. So their belief system itself guides them through that suffering in order to teach that individual that their wants aren't necessarily more than what they should be focusing on in aspects of their other life. So instead of focusing on your wants, focus on your needs. And then we're going to look at the two wings of Buddhism, which are Praja and Karuna. So Praja represents wisdom, while Karuna represents compassion. So together they allow that individual to fly and avoid their own suffering while still allowing kindness and compassion and wisdom for those who are going through suffering. So it's a really cool metaphor. Meditation is also one that will assist you in reaching that ultimate enlightenment, and it's a key technique used while practicing the Buddhism. It's believed to purify the mind of any distractions or harmful thoughts, and the postures are right here. So we have our full lotus, which is both ankles on either thigh, and then our half lotus, which is one ankle on the thigh. Meditation itself can be done while sitting, lying down, walking, and another way is actually doing difficult riddles that challenge their mind to explore a new reality, known as kanoas. And lastly, we're going to look at our views on death. So Buddhists have very strong values and views surrounding death, which is why it's actually been termed by majority in books and such as the religion for the dead. So in the eyes of both, in their eyes, both death and survival are key to success. So right here with the Vajrayana Buddhists, they believe death is a slow and unpleasant departure of one's body and mind, whereas the Tibetan Buddhists believe opposite. They believe there's a subtle consciousness that will remain in the body for approximately 3 days after death, which additionally, death and rebirth is viewed as a transformation into the mind of Buddha himself. And then within those views of death, an individual can reach Buddhist heaven, known as the Pure Land, and this land is composed of 3 sutras, which you must meet in order to enter Pure Land.
My name is Cassandra Campion, and I will be explaining rituals within Buddhism. Buddhism rituals often vary in death rites, geographic location, cultural background, social placement, the school in which the deceased had attended, and what era the individual died. The first path is carried out with the focus of a good death, by assisting the conscious of the deceased through the process of death and rebirth. Buddhists believe that just before death occurs, if an individual is on the right path, then this ensures that the individual will have a good rebirth. The second path involves protecting the living from manifestations, spirits, or demons once the individual has died. Although each path is not always chosen when performing rituals amongst the deceased, most are common death rituals within Buddhism. Rituals practiced in Buddhism focus on death because death is perceived as a step before rebirth. Mahayana Buddhist art has a 6-spoke wheel with 6 divisions and depicts realms of gods, titans, humans, hungry ghosts, animals, and hell. Each time individuals die, their spirit is reborn into one of these 6 realms. The samsaric view believes that experience and actions of one's current life will carry on into your next life. If an individual focuses their thoughts and actions for the good of others and themselves, then they are more likely to be rebirthed into a good life. Death is upheld as the most important during a Buddhist funeral because death is seen as the start of the journey to rebirth. Buddhists do not see death as an end, but as the start to the next phase of their purpose. To encourage the dying or deceased one through the process of death and rebirth, this entails surrounding them by individuals such as monks. Buddhist monks are more involved in the death cycle than any other life cycle within Buddhism. Another important aspect that monks participate within in the death experience is chanting or resetting mantras, which are spiritual words or verses that are repeated to ensure the dying individual's thoughts are pure. Once an individual has died, monks then return to the place that the individual has died and continues to chant or recite mantras or sacred texts or host meditation sessions. This assists the deceased individual through their journey through death. Afterwards, families will often give the monks food and clothing in hopes that their generosity will assist the deceased. Another ritual to transfer good karma is taking water from one vessel and pouring it into another vessel. This represents the good karma that is being poured from one life to the next. As well, sometimes a family member may temporarily become a monk or a nun in order to increase the good karma for the deceased. The Buddhist philosophy upholds the importance of impermanence, suffering, and death. Buddha believed that all suffering, known as dukkha, is significant within Buddhist rituals. Although the idea of suffering does not portray a positive message to individuals that are not a part of Buddhism culture, the idea of suffering within Buddhism is to teach Buddhists to understand and learn from life experiences. An example of this viewed as suffering would be a poor individual not receiving a handout. Handouts can lead to an individual not doing anything to improve their life. And when an individual doesn't work hard to improve their life, then they are not experiencing anything. They are not experiencing suffering, and they are not learning or growing, so that when they do die, they cannot carry that experience and that growth onto their next life. Therefore, they cannot reach a higher level. Along with other countries that have adopted Buddhism, such as China and Japan, carry out their funeral rituals by meditating on corpses or in graveyards to honor the deceased. To end this, Buddhist rituals begin before death to prepare the individual for their journey through dying, death, and rebirth. Thank you.
I'm Carson Brott. I'll be presenting on body preparation and body disposal. So when a Buddhist dies, their body is cleaned and dressed in casual clothes, and they're placed in a casket. They take this casket and they will leave it at the person's home or in the Buddhist temple, also known as a wat, for 3 to 4 days. During this time, that is when their inner breath continues. So although their body is dead, it's believed that their spirit is there. And this 3 to 4 day state is a time where they witness the clear light. And this is a state of meditation that's meant to maintain their spiritual well-being before their body is disposed of. So a person who recognizes the clear light in the moments of its arising may rest in a meditative state for some period of time, usually 3 to 4 days, during which time the inner breathing continues. Also during this 3 to 4 day period, monks will visit their house every night, and they will be reading Buddhist scriptures. This is also a time when friends can visit the casket as well as family. So, funeral wakes. Buddhists can be buried or cremated, although they prefer cremation. So they will have a cart or a car, a truck or a hearse, take them to the cemetery or the cremation grounds. Most often cremation, though. It's a personal preference whether or not they do cremation or burial. Cremation is much more common. So for the funeral procession, usually it will be everybody who is attending the funeral in the funeral wake. And they will have a number of monks there as well. So it's noted that during the procession, a long white cord is attached to the casket, and 8 monks, together with lay devotees, carry the cord. The number of monks carrying this cord is flexible as well, and this comes into play later in the funeral. Body disposal, so often cremation, sometimes burials as well. So we're going to go through cremations for the most part. So they will have their funeral procession, and they will be reading off the biography of the person who's died. During this time, they hand out the Dok Mai Chan, which is a sandalwood flower with one incense stick and two small candles attached. Everyone in the attending the funeral will get one of these, and they can light these candles and place them by the casket. As well as that, they will take the long white cord I mentioned previously. 5 or 10 people, important people to that person or important to the community, will place yellow robes on that white cord. And then the most senior monk in the procession will collect those robes and contemplate the dead. And this is supposed to bring merit to the people who allow this monk to do so, and they can devote this merit to the person who has died as well. Once this is all done, the chairman of the funeral proceedings will ignite the funeral pyre. So funeral pyres can be inside a Buddhist temple or outside. This just depends on your access to those sort of things. With the final body disposal, so dealing with ashes, often ashes will be collected and placed into a ash urn or a reliquary and placed in a columbarium. So my background image here is a columbarium in Malaysia. If you've never seen one before, it's similar to having
This is grieving. Death, illness, and aging are portrayed in Buddhism as the fundamental sufferings that everyone must confront. Since Buddhism evolved as a faith more than 2,500 years ago, it has branched off in many directions due to the separate cultures it found itself adapting to. Although these different practices of Buddhism may differ in part because of the cultures of the practitioners, they all hold meditation as a key aspect to healing from grief, loss, and inevitably death. According to Nichiren Buddhism, specifically, there are 3 kinds of pain that one must go through in life: physical, psychological, and existential. Death forces the individual to face all 3 of these at the same time. By facing one's own mortality, it is possible to alleviate the uncertainty and fear associated with death. This eternal view of life allows those holders of this faith to have hope. Those lost to death will be reincarnated, and one day the loved ones parted will be reunited in life again. Holding the view that all suffering is transitory in nature helps the grieving individual to find their way through the pain. According to the Nichiren Buddhist philosophy, the universe is an enormous living entity in which cycles of individual life and death are continually repeated. Taking refuge is another way that Buddhists must resolve their grief. In the Tibetan form of the faith, they believe in taking refuge in the 3 jewels. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the community is the key to their meditative practice. This ability to take refuge allows the individual mourner the opportunity to visualize their deceased loved one last time in order to say goodbye. They visualize the dead walking on to their next life. This practice not only helps the mourner, but they also believe it allows the deceased to move on as well. The fable of Kisa Katomi is a famous parable in Buddhism. They have some version of it in several different forms of Buddhism. The name obviously changes depending on where it is. Basically, there's a woman whose infant dies. She goes to the Buddha and she asks him to bring her child back to life. He tells her that if she can find a mustard seed from a home that has not been touched by death, he will do for her what she's asked. So she goes with her dead child in her arms from home to home to home, seeking a mustard seed from someone who has not experienced death. And after several houses, realizing that she cannot find a single person who has not been touched by death, she recognizes what the Buddha was trying to teach her, that death is something that everyone must face. And she's able to put her child to rest and allow him to move on to his next life. This fable is one example of how Buddhists view the significance of death as part of life's journey. Mindfulness. How do Buddhists find their way through the grieving process? Mindfulness is a common term associated with the therapeutic practices that has its origins in Buddhism. The early form of Buddhism viewed attainment of direct spiritual experience through meditation practice as a primary vehicle for liberation from suffering. In the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, which is traditionally practiced in the East, they have a different take on overcoming suffering. For these practitioners of the faith, they put emphasis on attaining Buddhahood. The two most important factors of Buddhahood are compassion and wisdom. The tradition of Buddhism is dependent on one's desire for and continued commitment to help others free themselves from suffering. The early form of Buddhism viewed attainment of direct spiritual experience through meditation practice as a primary vehicle of liberation and suffering. In Tibetan Buddhism, the mourning period typically lasts for 49 days. During this time, they express their grief by abstaining from dancing, singing, and wearing jewelry. They also wear older black clothes and their hair loose. By the end of the mourning period, they believe that their loved one has been reborn in the womb. Implications for professional. Having this understanding of Buddhism beliefs around death and dying and the traditional grieving practices allows professionals some insight into how they can best help their clients' patients. Kushiki Chowdhury says in his article that it's important for counselors to help their clients foster hope, confidence, positivity, and the will to live. These are essential for energizing the body's healing powers. In traditional Chinese Buddhism, they believe that repentance is a key part to healing the body. It's essential for cleansing their karma. Without repentance, they could cause harm or even destroy the precept essence, an essence inherent in the body of a recipient of the precepts, which is crucial for higher meditative attainments. Understanding the significance of repentance is helpful for anyone in the counseling field. Mixed emotions are often felt during the grieving process. This can often be a sense of guilt for not doing enough. Such feelings of guilt can worsen depression and anxiety. From a psychological perspective, repentance appears to help individuals alleviate such feelings through the expression of their actions, increase self-awareness of their intrapsychic, cultivate self-forgiveness, and instilled hope for future positive actions. These repentance rituals have similar cathartic effects to group therapy. By creating a supportive environment in which participants normalize one another's feelings, and the sutras affirm participants that their sins can be cleansed through genuine repentance. Physical treatment of the patient. Many Buddhists may choose to abstain from pain medication, especially in palliative care. This is because they want to remain clear-headed in order to have for them to have their mindfulness and being able to be aware of everything. It's very important to them. What can we do? We can offer them options. We can offer them different pain medications that may have fewer side effects. It's important that we do not force the issue of pain medication in palliative care. What we can do is offer the minimal effect medications. Many Buddhists actually prefer to know death is coming. As they look forward to their next life, a calm, peaceful setting is the best way to encourage a sense of calm and reflection in keeping with Buddhist meditative programs.